Hello, I'm Ashley Hicks. I want to show you 5 incredible rooms in West London, designed by Robert Adam in the 1760s at Syon House. Here is Syon, painted about 1700, something like that, when it belonged to the proud Duke of Somerset, who was an extraordinary, ridiculous, pompous man, who's immensely rich, having inherited through his marriage to the last heiress of the Percy family, the estates of the Percys, which included Syon. And it's on the north bank of the Thames, opposite Kew Gardens, where there used to be Kew Palace, and here you can see in this painting what looks like a Royal State barge taking somebody over to Kew. And what have we got? Let's see. Here's a picture of the house in the First World War, when the garden was all ploughed up and planted with wheat to help feed a hungry nation. Here is the lady who inherited the Percy estates very unexpectedly. So this was Lady Elizabeth Seymour, who was the granddaughter of the proud Duke of Somerset. And her mother, who was a thin from Longleat, was absolutely loathed by the proud Duke. He hated her. And so he didn't want to have anything to do with this girl's parents or her. So she didn't really expect to inherit anything at all. She had very few prospects. So it took her until the age of 23 to get married, which was very old in those days. And here's the man she married. And he was an absolute nobody. And clearly, by the time of this painting by Gainsborough, he's not a nobody any longer. He's got the Order of the Garter, the Star of the Garter, embroidered on his coat. He's clearly a somebody. But when they married in the about 1740, I think, he was pretty much a nobody. He was called Sir Hugh Smithson. He was a minor aristocrat from Yorkshire. His family money had come from being drapers in London in the early 1600s, where they'd made quite a lot of money. But, they bought an estate in Yorkshire and lived a fairly simple life up there. But he and Elizabeth met, married, and didn't really expect to inherit anything, especially because the proud Duke loathed her parents, and so tried to leave all his estates, and his wife's estates, to her cousin, Wyndham. But it then all went wrong, and first of all, Elizabeth's older brother, who should have inherited whatever there was to inherit, died. He died in Turin on the way to his grand tour of Italy. So she then became the heiress of that side of the family, and she and Hugh Smithson then managed to overturn the proud Duke's arrangements and actually inherit all of the Percy estates for themselves, except for Petworth in Sussex, which went to the Wyndhams. So they then became immensely, immensely rich and immensely grand. And the proud Duke, when he'd married the Percy heiress, had agreed to take the Percy name and give it to all his descendants. And he'd then been too proud to do that. He'd been determined to go on being a Seymour. And so Hugh Smithson was not proud at all. He was absolutely delighted to become a Percy. And so he had an Act of Parliament passed, making him Earl of Northumberland and Hugh Percy rather than Hugh Smithson. And so this caused, you can imagine the gossip and the rude remarks, the snobbery of all of society in London. Horace Walpole and people like that making terrible jokes about how Hugh Smithson's grandfather used to be either a coach driver or own coaches, and terribly, terribly snobby. But the two of them actually turned out to be a rather wonderful couple, and they were great patrons of the art and very, very sort of, philanthropic. And so the fact that they lived in this extremely grand way actually went down rather well in the end. They gave very good parties. People liked them. Here he is after she died, And when he's become master of the horse, and so he's been painted by James Barry, this ridiculous thing of being in full garter outfit, with this ridiculous antiquated costume and his velvet cloak, with the horse from his coach, presumably, because he's master of the horse. Barry's included the horses in the portrait, and going up the steps of the House of Lords, and in the background, the towers of Westminster Abbey, where he's just buried his wife. Anyway, here is Zion when they inherited it. And so they inherited in 1750. And that year or the year before, her father had commissioned Canaletto, who was in London, to paint this picture of the house. And the elaborate old formal garden had all died out in a great frost in 1739, and Capability Brown had been hired by her father to landscape the place. And so here it is, a bucolic riverside villa. And here is Robert Adam. And so they initially worked with James Paine to try to modernize the house, which was an incredible mess. It had been an abbey years before, and then it had been turned into a house by the Percys in sort of 1610 or something. But it hadn't been modernized since, really, and it was an incredible mess. And so they had Paine do some work, and then they met Adam. And Adam was quite a wealthy young man. He was the son of an architect called William Adam in Edinburgh. And William Adam had been not only an architect, but a builder. A lot of architects at the time did building contracting as well. And so he was a great builder, and he pretty much cornered the building industry in Scotland. And so by the time that Robert Adam, went to Italy on his grand tour in 1755, I think, his father, who had just died, had left his sons this very thriving architectural practice and building practice, and really quite a lot of money. They were really quite rich. And so Robert goes off to Italy on an actual grand tour. Most architects or architectural students would go to Italy as pretty much as servants of some nobleman, and would live in a very simple way. Adam instead went and he hired a coach and horses and marvellous apartment. He started hiring people, and the whole plan was for him to go back, initially planning to go back to Edinburgh, and then quite quickly realised that actually what he should do is go to London instead and open a new architectural office in London. And so he wanted to go back with a lot of material that he could work with. He wanted to train himself as an architect. And so he spent a lot of time with various tutors learning how to draw very elaborate architectural plans like these. And all his drawings are in the Syon Museum. And so they've all been preserved for posterity, which is wonderful. And so here are drawings he's made of ancient Roman furniture and decoration. And he hired a man called Clérisot, who was a great sort of French draftsman, to teach him how to draw, teach him about taste, teach him about how to interpret Roman architectural styles. Here are some sort of capricci views that he's drawn in roundels. They must have been intended for some sort of decorative painting scheme, I suppose. But you can see he's there just really getting to grips with the remains of ancient Rome, going back to the origin of things, rather than working like most of the previous generation of British architects, working from books and working from Palladio and working from that sort of, Palladian interpretation of the ancient world. He's going right to the source and going to actual Roman evidence. And then he hired more draftsmen to produce designs, recording actual old things and mouldings and all of these designs, which they could then incorporate in their work as a practice when they got back. And in the Syon Museum also are all of the working drawings for all of the projects, like Zion. Here on the left, a door handle. You can see the amount of detail they went into. And on the right, a railing and lamp standard for the front door. So here is Adam's plan for the house. So you can see the old cloistered house with a Jacobean long gallery added on the north end. And Adam has inserted these rather grand rooms. So the bottom of the plan, you can see what used to be the great hall of the old medieval convent, and then the house. And so there he's inserted a great sort of Roman hall. Then there's the vestibule, then dining room, drawing room, and finally the long gallery. And then in the centre of the plan, here in the centre of the courtyard, it says proposed rotunda. And so this was included on Adam's published plan of the house, which he published in the late 1770s. And it wasn't really proposed at the beginning. It was very much an afterthought, and I don't know whether actually he did actually propose it at all to the Northumberlands, or whether he just put it in later on for the published thing. But the only thing that was ever built in the courtyard was a temporary structure, which was a dining pavilion for a great dinner given by the Northumberlands for the King of Denmark. So that proposed rotunda never became reality. And here is the hall. And so you can see here he's created this extraordinary interior, immensely, immensely grand, double height space with these vast sort of, Roman tabernacle frames around the doors, this splendid coffered ceiling, and this coffered apse at the end, which is intended to have a cast of the Laocoon, that famous sculpture, in it, and then ended up having a cast of the Apollo Belvedere instead. But the entire room, just white originally. So all this very detailed architectural moulding, all painted white so that the actual natural light would bring out the architecture rather than paint. There is the published engraved view of the ideal that he had hoped for with the Laocoon in that niche, which does look rather better. And then here, the other end of the room, there needed to be stairs going up into the rest of the house due to the old medieval floor heights, which could not be changed. And so he's hidden the stairs behind this little screen of columns framing another sculpture. And so here's looking back from the top of those stairs, from behind the sculpture, which is, I think, the wounded gladiator, I think. And this was a bronze cast bought in Rome, I think, through James Adam, Robert's younger brother, who replaced him in Rome after Adam had come back to London. And the cast was done by Valadier, or the sculpture, I suppose, was modelled after the ancient sculpture by Valadier. And so here, this photograph is taken, I think, in the 20s, probably in the 30s, and there are mats laid through the hall for visitors. And you can see how marvellous it looked. And then here, looking at the sculpture, a detail of that other engraving, and looking through into the vestibule beyond. And so here is the vestibule, which is in sharp contrast to the great hall, the hall being all white. And the hall was repainted by John Fowler in 1965 in 14 different tones of white, which, is thought to be an extraordinary and wonderful thing. I think more recently it's been repainted in slightly different colours, but people get very excited about how Fowler did this incredible job of painting the room in all these different tones of white. I'm not sure that actually it did improve it. I have a feeling that the whole point was that the whole thing was without any colour at all, and the architectural mouldings provided the animated surface, and then were a total contrast to the next room here, the vestibule, which is this blaze of colour and imperial Roman grandeur. So there are these columns of verde antico marble, which again were bought by James Adam in Rome in 1763 or something, and shipped back to London. And they were supposedly dredged from the bed of the Tiber in Rome, and they were ancient, imperial columns. And what the truth of that is, I don't know. Some of them, I believe, in fact, are scagliola made to match the originals, but I'm not sure what the real history is. I think that the pilasters behind them, the flat bits against the wall, those are definitely scagliola. And scagliola, if you don't know, is plaster dust, marble dust and plaster mixed together with colour, and imitating real marble. And here the wall panels made, you can see, from, inspired by those ancient Roman trophy reliefs that have been drawn by Adam's draftsman in Rome. And so he was really bringing to the Northumberlands an ancient Roman interior, a very authentic thing, or so it seemed at the time. And then here on top of the columns are these wonderful gilded statues. Not sure about the lighting. These are my own photographs, which are not really terribly good, but taken with a phone, I suppose. And the incredible thing in this room, really, apart from the columns, is the scagliola floor. And look at the strength of that floor. Isn't it extraordinary? And of course, it looks quite shocking to our eyes now, and it must have looked very shocking to them then, probably. And the colour is so strong. It's not working very well with those chairs. Those chairs shouldn't really be in there. I think they were made for the music room of Northumberland House in the 1830s. And Northumberland House was demolished in the 1870s, and all of the contents were distributed between here and Alnwick. And so what chairs there would have been in there originally, presumably some sort of hall chair. Anyway, but the scagliola floor is quite extraordinary, and the very strong colours being rather like the luxurious, extravagant decoration of private palaces in ancient Rome. Look at that colour. Isn't it marvellous? And the original, I think it's almost exactly like the original floor, but the original floor was not terribly good quality scagliola or something, or maybe the Northumberlands just entertained too much, and it all got worn out and broken by 1830, and so it was replaced in imperishable scagliola done by Mr. Croghan, who had, I think, taken over Eleanor Code's practice. Anyway, here are those columns again, the statues on top, and the fireplace. And over the fireplace is a plaster medallion that's been painted to look like bronze, and it's surrounded by all this wonderful moulding. And of course, all these plaster mouldings are taken from those drawings made for Adam in Rome. And the fireplace itself, and a fire screen. And here's the plan of that vestibule. And you can see on the top is the hall, and then coming through into the vestibule with the columns. And there's a sort of screen of columns at the bottom of the image, you can see, which tidies up the form of the room, but also provides this sort of slightly screened area behind the columns. And on the right, he's squeezed in a privy, a loo, behind the wall there. And on the left, he's made a passage, small passage through to stairs going down to the kitchens. And that you can vaguely see in the right-hand corner of this photograph. You can vaguely see the jib door, the hidden door there behind the screen. And here is the door open, and I can't remember when I was visiting whether I was supposed to open this door and go in there and take photographs. I don't know. I'm slightly naughty sometimes. I might have pushed it open. But you can see it's a door in two parts. It's actually the whole corner of the room opens up. But when it's closed, you can't see it at all, which is rather fun. I love that kind of detail. Isn't that wonderful? Anyway, going on into the next room, which is the dining room. And so from that blaze of colour in the vestibule, we go through into this completely white room originally. And the sculpture niches on the left there, unfortunately, sometime in the 19th century, they were marbleized, they were painted with a sort of faux porphyry or something, which is a great mistake, and the whole room should be just white and gold. And then there's grisaille relief, faux relief, trompe-l'oeil relief paintings above the sculpture niches. They, I think, probably have darkened over time, and probably they're meant to be much, much lighter. But maybe they're meant to look like stone. I should think they're meant to be quite a lot lighter. A lot of these things, having a fire and endless candles, and the Northumberlands were famous for using thousands of candles and having ridiculously brightly lit rooms when they entertained. But all of that smoke must have darkened those paintings a lot. And then obviously the walls have been repainted over the years. But you can see it's a very sort of austere, rather grand room. And Adam was adamant that dining rooms should have no fabric in them. And there might have been a carpet on the floor, but you certainly shouldn't have fabric on the walls or even curtains. In here there are rather beautifully made shutters which were closed at night. And there are sculptures and not paintings, and certainly no tapestries, because of course you mustn't allow the smell of the victuals to get into the fabric. So you need to have stucco decoration. Looking back the other way through to the vestibule. And here's a detail of that apse ceiling. You can see it's got rather nasty lighting on top of that sort of beam there. It's a great mistake. And then here another jib door in that apse. And here's the detail I think that's the detail of the shutters. It's absolutely beautiful, beautiful carving. And now here, looking through from one of those apses on into the drawing room, which was again, originally this was an explosion of colour again. And Sir Hugh, was he Sir Hugh? Was he Lord Northumberland by this stage? I suppose he was Lord Northumberland. Was determined to show off, how immensely rich he was. And it wasn't, people now are very apt to say, oh, well, it's like billionaires today showing off. And it wasn't quite the same. At the time, it was thought to be a mixture of a sort of a social duty, and also there was something munificent about it. It wasn't exactly like Mr. Bezos and his wedding in Venice. It was slightly more like somebody donating to a museum. Anyway, he was very keen to have the most expensive thing he could possibly have, which was a 3-colour silk, which was very expensive at the time. And so he had a 3-colour silk woven for the walls of this room in Spitalfields. And so this was 3-colour silks were only woven in France. And I suppose when they were ordering things for this room. Maybe the war was still going on. I think the war with France ended in 1663. Or he just wanted to patronise silk weaving in Spitalfields, quite likely. Anyway, very, very vibrant, crimson, apple green and silvery white fabric, silk, woven for the walls of this room. And that then faded, of course. And it had faded so much by 1965, when John Fowler was asked by the then Duchess of Northumberland to help sort out the house a bit. He came up with a rather brilliant suggestion to turn the fabric round. And so they turned the fabric round, and I suppose the front had been, unevenly faded and probably made a lot darker by smoke from the fire, etc. And so the back looked rather fresh and rather interesting and modern and different. And so they turned the fabric round. Here is the fabric when it's looking reasonably new. So I think it was rewoven in 1830 or something, and this photograph is probably taken in 1870, 1880. So you can see how strong the pattern was. And here, a photograph taken probably in the late 60s, so probably almost immediately after it had been turned round. So you can see the rather interesting effect it gives. And then the ceiling has this extraordinary design. Here's Adam's first design for it, which is actually rather better. And so it's very complicated Roman-inspired ornament with these inset roundel paintings, which were painted on paper by, I think these are by Pergolesi. There was a whole lot of these Italians, some of whom Adam had brought with him from Rome. Others he'd met in Rome. Others were already working in London. And so these inset paintings on paper, and then the rest of it painted stucco. So here's the first design, and then here's what they went with in the end, which doesn't really work as well, because the roundels become rather too repetitive. And these are drawings again in the Soane Museum. And then between the windows, these massive pier glasses, and Lord Northumberland was extremely pleased with having what he thought were the biggest pieces of mirror glass in England. And these could only be made at the time in France, and so they were imported from Paris. And he tried to smuggle them in the diplomatic bag, which he was then found out by Customs and Excise and charged some huge amount of import duty. And those were in very elaborate carved giltwood frames by Adam again, who of course designed absolutely everything. There you can see the ceiling with these slightly excessively repeated roundels. And this was described, William Chambers, who was Adam's great rival as an architect at the time, described this as looking like skied dinner plates, as if people having dinner in there had thrown their plates up on the ceiling, which is quite a funny description. And then the doors at the ends of the room have these absolutely extraordinary frames, which you can't really tell until you get very close, but they're actually ivory with gilt lead, I suppose, mouldings on top. So they're sheets of ivory, which is an extraordinarily lavish bit of decorating. Anyway, back to the plans. You can see we've got through to the drawing room, top right, and then we're going through into the long gallery. So this was the long gallery of the Jacobean house, and then had these two little closets in the corners, and then a door at the end on the right going out towards the garden. And so how did Adam deal with this? So he was very concerned to break up the length of it, because of course when long galleries were originally done, it was considered to be absolutely marvellous to have this immensely long space, and nobody thought anything wrong with that. Adam instead was all about movement and proportion, and so he felt it was very, very important to break up the space. And although it was basically just a tunnel, he wanted to visually break it up. And so here's a picture of it taken probably in the 1920s, rather empty of furniture. I don't know why they've put that still bizarrely in the middle of the picture. Here it is. A bit later, they've brought a bit more furniture in. But you can see on the left, you see there's where the fireplace is, and there are two of these fireplaces, and then there's a door going out towards the courtyard, halfway between them. And so there he's tried to set up these sort of architectural incidents to break up the length of the room. And so here's his first sketch design, one of his first designs for it. And so on the top you can see he's trying to work out what to do. So he's got these tripartite bookcases between these areas where he's drawing a big arch with the fireplace in, another one with the door frame in, and he's trying to work out how to do that. And then here, final design, so bookcases on the left. And then here's the door with these niches with probably perfume burners or something on stands in them. And so it's a completely different treatment of that area. And it's very, very important that it's completely different. And here in his published works of architecture is that area. And so you can see how it really would have broken up the space rather effectively. And here the fireplace, and so the fireplace, there are no mirrors on this side of the room. The mirrors are all on the other side, because mirrors were mainly there in order to amplify the light at night. And so you would place your candelabra on a table in front of the mirror, and that would then reflect a lot of light over onto this side, coming from the same direction as the daylight in the day. So you didn't need mirrors on this side. And here with the sculpture in the niche here. And then unfortunately, of course, in the 1830s probably, they decided to fill in all those niches with bookcases and put mirrors over the fireplaces, so completely ruining the entire design of the thing. It doesn't make that much difference, but the books, do you see, sort of make a continuous thing, so it puts the room back into being more like a tunnel, which is unfortunate. Here's an Adam design for a carpet for the room, which then John Fowler found in the Soane Museum, and he then had that adapted, the new carpet, which you see here, but he made it very green instead, which not sure how well that works. And then here's some detail of wonderful sort of grotesque plasterwork in there. And above the bookcases are these inset roundels with portraits of members of the Percy family, and all the Percy ancestors of the Duchess, and going back, of course, to Charlemagne, who obviously is. And then inset, there are also imported from France these convex mirrors, which were thought to be a great novelty and tremendous fun. And then there are inset marble relief. And are they Renaissance ones? Are they older ones? Are they 18th century? I don't know. And then one of the closets decorated by Adam with this circular sort of pavilion inserted into the space. These little slim colonnettes and a wonderful curved jib door, and in the middle of it, this birdcage clock hanging there. It's a rather extraordinary thing. And some unfortunate lighting above the cornice, and the room repainted by John Fowler in the 60s. And then here is the door at the end of the gallery leading out to the garden, which, Adams, I think the door, the outside door, is not centered on the gallery, so that was a problem to start with. And then he also, I think, just architecturally, it felt better to have that end closed, and so he's made these jib doors with books on them. And this is a rather extraordinary thing, that the books, the book titles, and the book bindings, these spines, were specially made for the door, of course, by some bookbinder. And all of the titles are the titles of famous books of antiquity that had been lost. So there's some list, or there are references to all these books. But they were, the texts have not survived, so we only know the title and the name of the author. And so as a wonderful sort of classical, educated architectural joke, he had these doors made, and presumably this joke was devised with his clients, who were similarly educated, and they all thought it was a hilarious idea, and very, very sophisticated, of course, to have this entire library of empty books, impossible books. Lovely idea. Then some of the roundels were removed in, I think, the 1830s, when it was updated, and so the third Duke, who did the work then, had himself painted, and the rest of his family and put in, and so removed some of the other people who had been in there, like Queen Jane Seymour, who, of course, was a relation of Lady Elizabeth, and Henry VIII, and Protector Somerset, who was Jane's uncle. Anyway, those are now hanging in one of the corridors, which are crowded with all these ancestral portraits, which probably come from Northumberland House, because the Northumberlands who hired Adam had most of their paintings in Northumberland House in London, and really just showed sculpture at Syon. It was considered a villa. And here is an entrance ticket showing the house, signed by Elizabeth Northumberland, you see, Adam's client. And so she's signed a ticket for Mrs. Oliver to be able to bring 5 other persons with her to see Syon House and Gardens in the absence of the Duke and Duchess. That's rather good. When you go to see the house today, the ticket isn't quite so grand. But you do go, and you do get to see it. And here is, I assume this is the Duke's study. And I clearly took a photograph. These photographs taken about 15 years ago or something. But I love the Duke's leather armchair, which is completely decrepit and falling to bits. Very, very good. And the dahlias on the shelf behind. And then here, more bits from Northumberland House. This is a great Sèvres vase that was given to, I think, the 3rd Duke when he attended Charles X's coronation in Paris in 1830 something. And a whole lot of hall furniture from Northumberland House, probably, in the staircase at Syon. And there's the sedan chair from Northumberland House as well, with a Percy lion on top. And then this is the drawing room, not designed by Adam. So these rooms were, I suppose, by Payne originally, and then were done up by somebody called Cundy, I think, in the 1830s. But in there later on, after 1870, when the house was destroyed, was placed the fireplace from the glass drawing room in Northumberland House. And so this is another Adam work. It's this fireplace designed by Adam. It's rather beautiful. Scagliola. Here's the Adam office drawing for the scagliola maker, and you can see that it's been used and folded and refolded and got rather beat up before it went back to the office, and then finally was bought along with all the other, I think 9,000 and something, drawings from the Adam office by Sir John Soane for £200. But here's a detail of that fireplace. Look at the detail of that scagliola. It's so beautifully done. And the ormolu mouldings on it. And then this is the glass drawing room of Northumberland House. And so this house was at the bottom of what's now Trafalgar Square. And so Trafalgar Square in London was formed, in the 1840s or something initially, and then they wanted to build a big new road going down to the river, and so Northumberland House was in the way, and so the government made the Duke of Northumberland sell it to them so they could demolish it. And here it is painted by Canaletto at the same time as that view of Zion we saw earlier. There's the equestrian statue of Charles I, which is still there on the right as a sort of reference. But the house, of course, is gone, is demolished, as this was another old sort of Jacobean house, which had been done up by the Percys, and they'd added the Percy lion on top there. And it was an enormous house and a huge garden stretching all the way down to the river. And so Adam had made this glass drawing room for them in the 1770s, when the Duke of Northumberland had with a number of partners, had launched a glass factory in England. I think he was so annoyed at having to pay the tax on his enormous pier glasses that he tried to smuggle in for the drawing room at Zion, that he decided to start his own glass factory. And so to promote the glass factory, he created this glass drawing room with Adam. So this is one of Adam's drawings for it. And glass means not only the mirror above the sofa there, but the actual walls, the pink bit here. And so here Adam's drawn it as being dotted somehow, and whether this was an effect they were hoping to do on the glass, who knows. This is the carpet for the room, again in the Soane Museum. And the carpet obviously didn't last very long, so here it's been replaced. This is a photograph taken in the 1860s, late 1860s, before the room was demolished. This is the other rooms in the house. This is the great ballroom, which has these extraordinary paintings, including on the left a full-size replica of the great Raphael fresco in the Vatican of the School of Athens. And that is a painting done by, I think it was done by Mengs, I think, in Rome, commissioned by the Duke for this room, and it's now in the Victoria and Albert Museum. And this is the staircase of the house. You can see how enormous it was. And there's an actual photograph of the outside of the house. It's one of the earliest photographs of London, the house before it was demolished, but with the fountains of Trafalgar Square already in place and in the front. And then here engravings of the demolition of the house proceeding, and it was such a famous thing at the time that some magazine sent an artist there to take these views of the demolition progressing. But the miracle is that you can actually see that glass drawing room today. So here, it's not actually the real room, of course. This is actually a miniature model in the Victoria and Albert Museum, and it's a tiny thing. But if you look in it, you get a very, very good impression of exactly what it must have looked like originally, with the original carpet, the original form of the room, because it was enlarged slightly in the 1830s, which was a bit of a mistake. But this is as Adam made it, and it looks absolutely wonderful. And this little model is displayed next to a section of the actual wall, which is a fantastic thing. And whether the V&A owns the whole room, and they have the other panels, I don't know. I don't even know when they got them. I think maybe they got them in the 60s. My father told me about having gone to a party I think in the 50s, at Crowther's. And Crowther's was great, sort of, junk merchant, sold old bits, and they had a branch of Crowther's at Zion Lodge, because supposedly during the war, whenever a bomb fell, Mr. Crowther would nip through and pick up things and then sell them. But the main store was in Fulham somewhere, and you used to be able to rent the store and use these Adam wall panels from the glass drawing room of Northumberland House as your sort of party decorations. But you can now see this one panel in the Victorian Art Museum, and it is absolutely extraordinary. And it's glass with metallic spangles behind. And whether the metallic spangles are red or the glass is red or there's a red dye, I don't know, and then green. And so the red is obviously meant to look like porphyry, which it absolutely doesn't. But it's very sparkly and it's rather wonderful. And you imagine when the Northumberlands gave a party with all their thousands of candles burning, and you were moving around with the candle light picking up different bits of the spangles. It must have been the most extraordinary thing. And then on the glass there are inset paintings, like in that ceiling of the drawing room. And then there are these extraordinary mouldings, which some of them are in carved wood, some of them are cast lead, all gilded and sitting on the surface of the glass. And it's really worth a look. If you're in the Victorian Art Museum, go and look at that. But otherwise, go out to Isleworth and see Syon House, because it is extraordinary. So that's all we've got time for. Let's look at another house soon. Bye.